Hey everybody, and welcome to Autumn Leigh at Home. Today we are just going to enjoy the fall weather and the beautiful fall season and decorate our house, roast some pumpkins, make some pumpkin muffin with the roasted pumpkins, and cook from scratch. Please join me as we get started. The first thing that we want to do when we start getting our pumpkins ready for roasting is to cut them in half and de-seed the inside. So take all of that inside out. And when I started doing this and my kids realized what I was doing, they came running and were excited to try to help. And this is something that we all enjoy doing together. So of course I let them join in, but we take the time to get all the seeds and the insides out and put them in a separate bowl. And from there, all you have to do roasting pumpkins is the easiest thing ever. You just flip them upside down and put them either on a pan or on a roasting rack like I have, and put them in the oven at 350 degrees for about an hour. When you're roasting your own pumpkins, you're making your own pumpkin puree, and it's so wonderful to be able to use the pumpkins this way. These were decorative pumpkins that we actually were able to get when we were on the field trip with my daughter a few weeks ago, and I don't want them to go bad, and we didn't carve them, so they didn't go bad. They were perfectly ripe, wonderful pumpkins. So instead of allowing them to rot on the porch as decoration, I decided to go ahead and use these to make our own pumpkin puree. My daughter loves pumpkin muffins, and you can use pumpkin puree for so many things. And even if you don't want to use it right this minute, you can freeze it as well to be used at a different time. So today, that's one of the ways that I use the pumpkin puree, and I preserve it as well. I preserve it by freezing it, and I also preserve it by baking it into baked goods. So last year I did the same thing. I baked pumpkin muffins and put them in the freezer in multiple Ziploc bags, and they, after taking them out of the freezer and thawing, they tasted just like they did when I first baked them. So they were wonderful. Same thing with pumpkin bread. I did the same thing. I baked a few loaves of pumpkin bread. We ate one fresh, and then I was able to put two in the freezer, because when you roast your own pumpkins, you end up with a lot of pumpkin puree. And so instead of wasting it or throwing that pumpkin puree out that's perfectly good, I'm able to save it and have homemade pumpkin puree that has no additives in it, and we're able to bake with it and also preserve it that way, so that if there's a week where, say, I'm sick or I just don't feel like cooking breakfast, I can even pull those muffins out and they can eat them for breakfast. And it's one of my daughter's favorites. So it's nice to have in the freezer as a quick meal or a quick breakfast or even a quick snack or dessert, and also have the option and the versatility of the pumpkin puree to use it in other items and baked goods as well. This is just something that you can think about for your own pumpkins. If you happen to have pumpkins from Halloween that you didn't carve and that they're still healthy pumpkins, or even for decorations before they go bad, this is a way that you can use them and get your money's worth out of them. So not only did you have them for decoration, but now you can use them to make them into some healthy home-cooked, scratch-made food. So that's going to be our next goal. My daughter, we just finished up cleaning out all the pumpkins and putting them on the roasting rack. I'm going to preheat the oven to 350 degrees. And all I have to do is then put them in the oven and check them every once in a while. I don't want them to burn, and let them roast, become a little browned on top, and you may even see the peel of the pumpkin start peeling back a little bit, and that's fine. Another thing that you may see while you're roasting the pumpkins, every pumpkin is different. So if you have a different variety of pumpkin or even a homegrown pumpkin, you may see a lot of liquid or pumpkin juice come out the bottom. These did not have any at all, which I was very surprised, because last year I did have the pumpkin juice and liquid coming out and sitting at the bottom of the pan, but this year it was completely dry. But if you see that, that's normal. It's completely okay. You can actually use that for other things as well. However, you do want to try to get all the liquid out. So if you have pumpkins that after roasting, they're very watery, still super gooey, I would do your best to get a cheesecloth or some other form, a colander, something to put the puree in and try to squeeze as much of the juice out. If you don't, then when you go to bake with the pumpkin puree, it can cause your batter to be really watery and runny. And obviously you don't want that when you're baking. So don't panic if you see that. Just do your best to get as much of the liquid out of the pumpkin puree as possible, and then you won't have any problems with baking with it. Now that our pumpkins are done roasting and we are almost finished pulling off all of the peels, it is time to get started on making it into puree and blending it. So to do this, you can do it in many different ways. I have an immersion blender, so that's what I'm going to be using, but if you have a mixer or anything like that that will get the job done, that's fine too. You just want to put it into a bowl or in the mixer and blend it up until you get the consistency of the puree. So you want it really silky smooth and nice and soft looking. At this point in the day, we got our puree mixed up and it's nice and silky smooth. So I'm going to set this aside in the fridge until I can finish it later. My kids started getting really hungry, and so I had to push the pause button and get dinner started. And for today, because we spent a lot of time in the kitchen, I wanted to do something quick and easy. We had a loaf of artisan bread that I had baked, made from scratch, and I can link that video on to the end of this one where I show you how to make it. But I had this artisan loaf made and I wanted to be able to use it up before it went bad. So I decided to do grilled cheeses and tomato soup. So all I did was canned tomato soup, but I add basil, and this is homegrown dried basil that we grew here at the house. I added that. You can do store-bought, and then cream or milk to the basil and the tomato soup and heat it up in the microwave. And then the grilled cheeses, I cut the artisan loaf into thin slices. I put butter on it and then dip whatever cheese is your favorite with Italian seasoning and garlic salt, and then roasted them in the oven until the cheese was melted and put them together and made them into a grilled cheese. This is one of my kids' favorites. It's easy, so easy to do, and they absolutely love it. It's one of those, home cooked meals that is just nice to have on a cozy fall night. At this time, my kids are well fed and in the bed. I am now getting back and started with the pumpkin puree and baking our pumpkin muffins. Just a moment ago, you saw the ingredients that are listed on the recipe, and if you're interested in this recipe, I will post it in the description below. I also want to ask if you guys bake this or make your own pumpkin roast. Of course, show us, send us a picture in the comments, post in the comments, and let us know how it goes. If there's any questions that you have, of course, feel free to ask. This recipe is from the website Foodal.com. It calls for 1 1/2 cups all-purpose flour, 1 teaspoon of baking powder, 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda, 1/2 teaspoon of salt, 1 teaspoon of pumpkin pie spice, 1 15-ounce can of pumpkin puree or homemade puree, which is what we're using today, and then 1/3 cup of vegetable oil, 2 large eggs, 1 1/4 cups plus 1 tablespoon of sugar divided, and 1 teaspoon of cinnamon. You start off with mixing all of the dry ingredients, and then I set those aside, and now I'm measuring out the 15 ounces of pumpkin puree. Once I have that and I've measured it out using the weigher and tearing the bowl weight out, I want the 15 ounces of just the pumpkin puree. Now that I have that, I've set it aside and I'm taking the time to put the pumpkin puree in these containers and then freezing them in the freezer. Now, again, there are multiple ways that you can preserve the pumpkin puree that you've made homemade. One of them is by putting them in containers and putting them in the freezer. Another is by the other thing that we're doing, which is baking and doing baked goods and putting the baked goods in the freezer. Those baked goods lasted us a while and I didn't have to make them for a while afterwards. So it was nice having both options because then you have the versatility of just plain pumpkin puree that you can mix into other ingredients or other baked goods or other recipes, or as well as having the baked goods in the freezer too. Once you have your dry mixture and it's to the side, you've already mixed all the dry ingredients, and then you also weighed out your 15 ounces of pumpkin puree, it's time to go ahead and add your sugar and oil and 2 eggs to the pumpkin puree in a separate bowl from the dry ingredients. I lost track of how many cups of sugar or how many 1/4 cups of sugar. I was using a 1/4 cup measuring cup, and I was supposed to add 5 because it's supposed to be 1 1/4 cups of sugar, and I lost count. So I believe I have 1 1/4 cups, but that's okay. And if you added the sugar to the dry ingredients, that's fine too. I don't think it's that big of a deal. This is where you're mixing the wet ingredients, and then from here you will fold the other ingredients into the wet ingredients. So you'll take the dry ingredient bowl where it has the cinnamon and or excuse me, not cinnamon, but the baking powder, baking soda, salt, flour, and pumpkin pie spice that were set aside into one bowl, and then you mix them in with the pumpkin puree and the sugar and the eggs, and be able to mix them all together. I thought I had fall muffin cups, and unfortunately I couldn't find any, so I had to use my pastel ones. But it still gets the job done, and I have to say cleaning muffin tins is probably one of my least favorite things to do. So I am gifting myself muffin cups and making it is okay to have them and using the pastel Eastery ones, but that is okay. We are going ahead and filling them up, and about halfway through filling these muffin cups up, I realized that I don't think I remembered to add the 2 eggs. So now, unfortunately, after kind of kicking myself, I go ahead and pour all of it back into the bowl and took a deep breath and added the eggs, mixed it all back up again, and started all over. So I put the muffin cups in, sprayed them with a little nonstick spray, and filled them up about 2/3 the way to be placed in the oven. Once everything is all mixed up again and back into the muffin tins, I went ahead and preheated my oven to 350 degrees. And while that was preheating, I started mixing up my other mixture, the sugar, which is the 1/4 cup of sugar mixed with 1 teaspoon of cinnamon, and set it aside, and went ahead and placed the muffins in the oven, and they're supposed to bake 20 to 25 minutes. Now, I typically start checking mine a lot sooner than that just because my oven usually bakes faster than most. So I started checking mine about 15 minutes in. But before you put them in the oven, you want to sprinkle the tops with that sugary mixture, and that's what gives it that beautiful look on top and the wonderful taste, the added taste. Now, if you really wanted to, you could leave this off if you don't feel like it's necessary or you're trying to cut back on the sugar part, but I will say that it contributes to the sweetness, and I just really like it. So we definitely did not cut back on that. But I sprinkled it over each one, made sure each one was nice and coated on top, and then put them into the oven. Our pumpkin muffins are finished, and I just want to take this time to say thank you so much for joining me today. We were able to make some wonderful pumpkin muffins from homemade pumpkin puree using pumpkins that we just had as decoration. I appreciate you guys taking time out of your day to watch. Please like, subscribe, and share, and I hope to see you guys next time.